In this video, I'm going to show you how to make, in Matplotlib, a chart where the title has multiple colors. Okay, and the use of that might just be to create a simpler visualization with a little more clarity, a little less clutter. Okay, so here's an example of something I did in Matplotlib, where you can use the title to convey the fact that the blue line belongs to this generic co, and the orange line belongs to Perfunctory Incorporated. And once we have less clutter, that's just generally advisable for anyone who cares about good data visualization. Get rid of a legend, something like that. Label data directly, integrate labels into the graph. So those are common things you're going to get from different books on better data visualization. One of them being called Better Data Visualizations, which gives a similar kind of example about using the colors in your title instead of a legend. And then Storytelling with Data, it also comes up to avoid legends or label your data directly when possible. So the idea of this demo is to show you how to do that with Python's Matplotlib. Okay, so we're going to get started. And I'm using a Google Notebook. And first, I'm just going to run these cells, which we're not going to talk about right away. But the main thing is that I've gone ahead and imported Matplotlib and NumPy. And then I have this function, which you can download. There'll be a link in the description, and a few helper functions as well. All right, but that's not the point yet. To start with, for those of you in a hurry, I'm going to give you the details-free example of how to do this, simply using this function that you can download that's already been written. Okay. So what it's going to do, just like in the example at the very top, is create a title centered above your figure with multiple colors for different parts of the string title. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by creating my figure and axes objects. So I'm working with the object-oriented Matplotlib interface. I'm going to create some data, what I'm actually going to plot. So here's just numbers 0 through 1 spaced out, 50 of them. And here is, we're going to call it signal. It's just going to be an array of all 4s, 50 of them, and then noisy, an array. We'll just take the signal, which is a constant array of 4s, and add some random noise to it. Random.normal. Okay. And let's go ahead and plot that. Okay, so here we have our data. We want to title it so that you know one of these kind of like the true signal underneath, and then we might measure instead the orange being the signal plus some noise. So obviously, with your simple set title function, we could use this. It's just going to add the title, and you could customize it with the color if you wanted to, but it's just going to apply it to the entire title. So we don't want to use that. So here I'm using ax.setTitle. The same thing would be true if you instead used the other interface with just plt.title. These two lines of code do the same thing. Okay, but we're not going to use that. Instead, we're going to use this color title function, which I've created. I'm going to pass labels to it and colors as well, which I have to create those first. So I'm not going to run it yet. So I'm going to create this as a list, just anything, any sequence of data. This is going to be the actual title, but I'm going to create it as a sequence so that I have the different pieces of the title, which will each be colored independently. So the total title is going to be the signal and the noise, but I'm going to break this up so that signal is its own color and noise is its own color. So here I go with that. All right. So I've got that split up into 4 different pieces. And I've kept the spaces in there too. Okay, you're going to need those because that spacing won't be done automatically. And now I'm going to create another list, which is the list of colors I want, which, at the first element in color should correspond to the color you want for the first element in your list of labels. So first we'll just make black text. And then for the signal, we're going to make C0, which in this case is the blue. And we'll go back to black text for the words and the. And then noise will be in C1, which is orange. C0 and C1 are coming from the default color map here. All right. So now that I have that, I can run this. And boom, I have exactly what I want. It's as if the signal here in blue is acting as a label for the blue line there. Okay, so that's the basic usage of it. There's a few extra complications we're really not going to get into in this video. You could look at the code, look underneath for additional customizations. But I do want to call out something in that you don't want to start messing with the size of the figure after you've done this because of the way the spacing is set by the color title function. So, for instance, I would not want to change the figure width after this call right here in the program. So if I said set fig width afterwards, so the default figure width I think is 6, so I'm going to just make it twice as wide with this call. That's going to screw up the spacing. So simply don't do that. You don't want to make that call. You also don't want to do anything like setting a tight layout. If you're used to doing that, that's also going to mess with the spacing a little bit. Because in general, you don't want to start changing the way the figure works, its size really, after you've done this, because it is working on axes coordinates. Okay. Yeah. Take-home messages. Don't run anything like these. Okay, so that's really the basics. If that's all you have, attention for today, you can quit watching this video right now. We're going to go a little bit deeper into what makes it work if you were to look at the code for this function. And so that's the next section. And that's the get window extent method and the axes coordinates, as opposed to, say, data coordinates, which is what you would be more used to. So axes coordinates, we can talk about that first. Okay, so here I've created a plot And let me change the limits just for the sake of it. All right, so this is in data coordinates. And here I've just changed the x limits to go from the data point 0 to the data point 3. But in axes coordinates, this bottom left-hand corner would be 0, 0, and this top right-hand corner would be 1, 1, because it's 100% of the width all the way to the right and 100% of the height all the way up to the top. Okay, so that's simply the idea of axes coordinates, which we can invoke with this ax.trans axes. All right. That's all I'm going to do with that. Now we're going to talk about get window extent, which it's going to return a bounding box for something, an object you've created in a plot. All right, so let's work with an example so we see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to create my plot with that, and I'm going to add text to it. Okay, so this is the X and Y position of where the text starts. And my text is just going to be the string hello friends, and I'll make it a little bigger and go ahead and run that. Okay, so you might not be used to assigning your text to a variable, but that's so that we can reference it later in our program. Again, just for the sake of it, I'm going to change the axes limits up here. I'm going to create a variable transform, which is ax.trans axes. Right, so this is now a kind of transformation in Matplotlib, which is telling me that I want to work with axes coordinates, right, which we'll reference later. Before I call get window extent, I'm also going to run this canvas.draw thing. Just it will get what's called a renderer, which just think of it as a necessary step before you start doing the rest of what we're doing. And then what the get window extent function does is it gets a bounding box for an object. So for our text here, it tells us, like what is the rectangle kind of that it's placed in our figure. So I'm going to assign that bounding box to the variable b, and we get it from get window extent. And this is going to give you the bounding box, actually not in the right coordinates, not in the axis coordinates we want. So we've got to transform that, because by default it would be in, I think, display coordinates. So you can transform that with this extra code. All right, so we have that. And let's just go ahead and see what happens. Okay. So I have this bounding box object, which is the variable b I've printed. Okay. So it's telling me kind of x0, y0, that would be the bottom left corner of where hello friends is written. And then x1, y1 would be the top right corner of where it's written. And I can show you exactly what it's creating with this by drawing in some lines around that. So this horizontal helper is a function that I created above in the notebook. I'm not going to go into what it's doing, but it's just for the purposes of helping see what the bounding box is really doing. Okay, yes, the bounding box is exactly this box created by these straight lines. Okay. Now the value of that is that we started this text at the point 0.1, 0.1, which is over here. And you don't know just running ax.text when the text is going to end. So in our case, the really valuable thing is finding this coordinate over here, which in data coordinates is about 1.25, but in axes coordinates is about 0.63. So we're about 63% to the right extreme of the figure. So that's going to be important, because then when we create our title, what we're doing is we're going to add text for, whichever terms you want first in one color. And then the code is going to know where did that text end. And then at that X1 coordinate, that's when we can place the next piece of our title. Okay, so let's just do an example with that by hand without using the color title function. And I'm going to make the figure a little bit wider than normal with that fig size parameter. Setting my X limit. Canvas.draw, which just to, so that seems a little less mysterious. I'll run the above without having run fig.canvas.draw. And you would just get this error because you can't get the window extent without a renderer. So that's the value there. Okay. Get our transform just as before. Get our title. Call it title words. And we're just going to make up some nonsense title. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Okay, so that's the basic title. And we're going to start splitting it up. So let's make goose and gander stand out with their own colors. So we're going to isolate those words. Add a typo there. Place that with a comma. Okay, so we have our title split up, and then our colors. Make a list. All right, so we had 4 pieces to the title list, and we have 4 different colors. And now we're going to start this at some X position, which is going to be the X coordinate in axes coordinates where the title starts. All right. So that's the first use of this. And I'm just going to give it any value. We're going to tune it as we go. And now we're going to start actually putting this text onto our figure. So for the string and for the color in these 2 lists, first we're going to add the text at the X position, and at a Y position, we'll just call it 1.02. So it's going to be slightly above the top of the Y-axis, just like a title would be. We place our string in there, specify the transform we've already created, set the color to the corresponding color, and we'll set the size to 20. So the text is a bit larger than normal. So in this for loop, I've got to be updating X position so that after I place what's good for that string, goose is going to be placed on the figure exactly after what's good for the ended in the figure. So I'm going to get the bounding box for my text from the get window extent method, transform that into usable coordinates. And then get where the text ended with this bounding box.x1. Okay, so now for the next iteration of the for loop, it's going to plot the text exactly to the right of the previous piece. So let's run this, see what happens. And I've made a typo, which I can fix. Okay, so I have it. Not bad. It looks like I lost a space up here, because you see there's no space between goose and is good. So I'm just going to add that, run it again. And now, it looks good in terms of the spacing is all good within the phrase, but I'd like to center it. So I can do that by tuning this X position to make it a little bit higher to start with. So you could guess and check. We can see where the title ended over here just by printing out X position. And we see it's 0.919. Okay, if I do 1 minus that, 0.008, that's about how much space we have left over here. Okay, and we have about 0.01 amount of space over there. And we want those to be equal. So I am going to tune this by hand until I get about the same number in both places. Okay, and that's about good enough for me. To my eyes, that's a centered title. Depending on use case, you might want to make it more precise. And that's actually a parameter in the color title function, because this process of retuning the position is done in a while loop. Okay, and you can just set the precision to be arbitrarily close so that you get really, really close to your text being exactly centered. All right, so that's how to use this function, a little bit about how it works. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.